And I think organizations have done their employees and teams a disservice by not creating constraints because they think that those constraints are somehow restricting freedom, when in fact, they're very much enabling it.
Andrew, welcome to the Future Work Podcast. Really great to have you. And gosh, I really enjoyed our previous conversations, and I'm looking forward to today immensely.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Right, you're the expert. You've done thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of workstations and tracked them through a variety of large and small companies. Um, Hybrid has become such a catch-all phrase. What do you believe? How do you believe that ambiguity of that catch-all nature is actually hurting flexibility and hurting organizations overall, trying to figure out exactly what hybrid means and how to create a program?
Well, I think that people tend to do better when they have freedom within constraints.
Explain that.
Yeah, so like I think that teams like tend to do better when there's uh, a lot of freedom, but there's some type of constraint.
I
And
don't run real well with handcuffs on.
no, no, I just mean that like if you're running, you might be running in a race, and that race might have, you know, some boundaries in terms of like, maybe you're doing a marathon instead of a half, or you're doing a 5K. Like you've got some sense of like what you're doing and the boundaries within it, but like it's your choice on how fast or how hard to run. That's what I mean by like freedom within constraints. And I think that this concept of return to office has been um, like muddied by organizations unwilling to create clear constraints. And all I mean is these are the days that we're going to be in. So it's shared to create a shared experience, or these are the hours that we expect people to be in so that people can schedule meetings around the same time so that they're not wondering what each personal schedule might be. And I think organizations have done their employees and teams a disservice by not creating constraints because they think that those constraints are somehow restricting freedom, when in fact they're very much enabling it.
Okay, I'm going to stick with your constraints comment for a second.
Yeah.
Um, you like to run marathons. I like to run sprints.
Yeah.
You work for a company that their constraints are sprints. I work for a company who puts out marathons as their constraints. I'm going to go look for a new job.
I think that should be an acceptable outcome.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and
Good.
I think companies need to get comfortable with the fact that if they're going to decide to run a marathon, or they're going to decide to run a sprint, and to make that like a practical metaphor, a large corporation, planning over the course of the next 3 to 5 years versus a startup that's thinking in the next 18 months, marathon versus sprint.
Yep.
I think that is like a really healthy thing to acknowledge, that like this is maybe not the race for everybody. In fact, it is decidedly not the race for everybody. And we need people that wanted to sign up for a marathon. The last thing that you want to be realizing midway through a sprint is that you're actually in a marathon.
Yes, exactly. No,
Right?
it's really true. What's fun too, when you think about that, is we're talking about companies and return to office policies for the moment and hybrid and defining that. But when you lay the constraints on it, that's really an HR employment job description issue in hiring the people that want to be in a sprint versus the people that want to be. Getting the right people in the first place makes a huge difference in their willingness to deal with a particular group of constraints. And when we look at job descriptions, and because we deal with lots of HR companies like you do, we do lots of HR companies. They're trying to do a job description that brings them everybody. They're
That's right.
casting such a wide net
That's right.
that they really don't. And then they might pick the person with the most talent, but they found a sprinter instead of a marathoner. And so ultimately, it's not going to work. How do you deal with that? How do you drill that policy down to a hiring process and still get enough bandwidth to win the battle for talent?
Yeah. So I think this is like a really like phenomenal question. I was talking to It's about 75 workplace leaders. We were doing like this roundtable, and this comment came up that I thought was
Big table, by the way.
it was three sections, so it was like 25 a piece, and then it was like 75 in total. But yeah, a large table. So um, and we were the loud table. Like they told us to quiet down because we were laughing too hard. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. But there was this wonderful comment that a workplace leader mentioned, which is everyone talks about return to office as though 100% of employees were previously at the office. And the reality is that we hired a bunch of kids who recently came out of college, and a big part of our workforce, not maybe 20%, but call it 10, 15% of our workforce, has never been to the office before. They have no idea the norms. And so this isn't a return. This is like a first, arrival. And the point that she was making is that the team that we built during COVID might not be the team that we need post RTO in 2025. And it should be acceptable to have the conversation that like the shape and construction of the team might be different, and that shouldn't just be on the recruitment side, like net new people, but it might mean that being earnest and honest with the current team that has been there throughout the change that the organization and the macro has seen, being honest with them about what the season of work is post RTO is a major change. A lot of people don't talk about the fundamental driver for a lot of hybrid work is childcare. The reason that people left, many people, not all, but many people moved to different parts of the country and different parts of the world, um, was so that they could have childcare. And corporations largely don't provide childcare. So when
Correct.
you ask people to return to office, they're weighing it against very real consequences and very real costs of trying to take care of their families.
Benefits packages in general, in the future of work are going to become more and more elemental to job making decisions overall. I had a really interesting offline conversation with one of the congressmen that put together some of the current government benefit packages and different packages are very, very involved with massive number of major companies. And it was interesting to discuss not just child care, but the work decision making process. What percentage of the where do I go, the company A or B, based on their benefits package, which is focused on healthcare and maternity leave and childcare are two of the major elements within that decision making process. You know, so I agree with you overall. At least half the workforce, at least half the workforce is that's a key decision in everything they do.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
uh,
right.
which means, will they go back to the office or not?
Yeah, and I think that if you're going to create clear constraints, first off, I think all organizations should create clear constraints about what type of work they expect from their teams. They do it in every other facet, right? They do it through OKRs, and we do it through goal setting, and we do it through performance reviews, we do it through PIPs. We do this in every other form. We should do the same when it comes to the physical behaviors. Are we physically in person? Are we mixed? Are we fully remote? And I think that the very next thing is that you need to live with the consequences of those constraints.
Well, we used to do that. We used to call it a time clock.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, everybody hated punching it, by the way.
Sure. Well, they got their buddy to punch it. And now we have that thing called coffee badging. It's the same. It's like the equivalent. It's the modern equivalent.
No, I think that's true. But when we talk about the purpose of return to office in a lot of companies, and I'll quote or subquote Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan, is to help preserve our culture. So here's my question. If that's true, but if 25% of the employees in the next 5 years are going to be replaced by an AI element or of some sort, and each one of us is going to show up like we show up with a laptop today and a mobile phone today. We're going to show up with a laptop, a mobile phone, and our AI assistant.
Hmm.
How will the change in cultures be impacted by those AI assistants even more than returning to the office.
You are asking a compound question.
You're darn right I am.
Uh, I okay. There are maybe, if it's okay, can I break my answer
Oh,
into
good.
two
Break
sections?
it down. Yeah, break it down.
So there's like two core things that I think are worth talking about. The first is this question of, how does AI impact culture? It's a great question. Uh, the second is the relationship between physical space and culture that you pointed out at the top of the example with Jamie Dimon. I I want to do like maybe the second. I want to work backwards. So I deeply believe that the purpose of physical buildings uh, and the purpose of specifically humans being in person with one another is to build trust. I think,
I would agree. I would agree with that completely.
and I think that the size of the trust tank of an in-person team is at least is like several times larger than the size of the trust tank of a remote team. And what I mean by that is you can build trust remotely, but there is a limit. You can build trust more efficiently when you are in person and not a digital avatar in 2 dimensions. There is
Mm.
something about body language. There's something about 3 dimensions. There's something about not time boxing every interaction to 30 minutes, 25 minutes, or 60-minute increments when you're on your
Mhm.
schedule on your calendar, when you log
Mhm.
in and log out. There's something about that fundamentally changes how much you trust another person, and it's very hard to replace. And the closest thing that I've seen to replacing this is actually Google's most recent Gemini presentation, where they showed a presence-based
Mhm.
system that felt like you were in the room with the
Right.
person. I'm really curious how that affects remote trust building.
Well, it's funny. I'm going to go way back in the time machine. In 82 or 3, maybe it was 83 or 4, we actually built in one of our facilities a holographic receptionist. And it was literally in a box. It was like old, really
Yeah,
old
yeah,
style. It was in a
yeah.
box and everything, but it's still really cool and everything. And the reception was actually just in the next room, but she was also handling 3 buildings. So the primary building and everything. Customers hated it.
Yeah,
They knew who she was. They
yeah,
had met her. They had dealt with her face to face. They hated seeing her holograph.
yeah,
They were now this is like in the early 80s, so think nobody even had a PC, okay? This was very Disneyland stuff, that we were playing with. But still, the fact that everybody said, "No, we want the real person back." I think that 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 begs a little bit of what you're saying, and I'll also add a comfort point to it. When you talk about meetings where trust is developed a lot of times in teams and such, that you spend almost 20% more time in a meeting where the meeting is in a conference room with couches as opposed to chairs and tables.
yeah.
Okay. Now, does that mean you're more productive or less productive? To your point of trust and relationship building, and to Jamie's point on culture, it's more productive. To point just on the agenda and blah, 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 it may or may not be more productive, but to the cultural elements in it, it is much more productive.
But I want to talk about why, and then I want to get to the reason that trust is so important is not in an abstract sense. It's in a deeply practical one, which is that all great high functioning teams, they it is how they resolve conflict that produces great products.
Yep.
It's in the argument, in the debates, in the thousand no's that you put into a product. It's in all of the conflict and getting through the conflict that a great product comes out on the other side. And a great product can be a service, it can be a physical product, it can be a digital product. It doesn't matter what it is. Whatever you make, it runs directly through conflict, and teams that are the highest performing, in my opinion, tend to be very high trust. So if you want a high performing team, you need, upstream of that is high trust. Upstream of high trust is essentially just like, how do you build it? And it's more efficient, in my opinion, to build that in person than it is distributed. And so that when he says like preserve our culture, I think there's a practical application to that, which is just like we can debate with one another around the great ideas that we think are going to make our organization better, and we're going to do so in a way that preserves the relationship between the people and allows the idea to sit, independent of the person making it. It's like, how do we get to the best thing? So,
If you say, and I agree with you, the high trust is critical to a high performance team. It's not just being in person. I can put together a high performance, highly trusting team by bringing in people that all have known and proven capabilities. So when one says something, the others go, yes, this person knows what they're talking about. I know they know what they're talking about.
yeah,
Um, and I think that comparable capabilities, if you're going to put together a trusting group on opinions or performance on a specific anything, you're going to build anything. Your architect has to know the engineer knows what he's talking about. The engineer has to know that the
yeah,
architect has put together a good design, et cetera, et cetera. Um, you can't have trust unless you know someone's capabilities because you can't ascertain whether their representations are accurate. So I think that's an element you have to add in there.
yeah. Certainly, I am presuming uh, capacity and aptitude of the individuals. I am just saying, all things equal, if you can run the experiment of an in-person team or a distributed team with the same capabilities and same backgrounds, with the same purpose and goal, you are probably going to see the in-person team outperform, is my assumption, outperform in terms of quality of product, largely because they're building from a foundation of trust. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to build great products distributed. And I think that both things can be true. You can build great products remotely. It's just there's a lot of coordination cost, and companies don't like to talk about the function and work of remote is not the same. Like the norms and routines and the rituals that you apply to a remote team are fundamentally different to those that you do in person. And we've gotten so wrapped up in trying to recreate this like apples to apples, when I just think that they're both fruit, but they're different fruit. Um, and you know that's an uncomfortable truth, but like it just is. It's like some things are better in person and some things are, like documentation, for instance, is substantially better distributed. The how much it forces people to be thoughtful about their asynchronous communication. There's a bunch of stuff to learn from that you could apply elsewhere. But right now we're like babies, we're like infants at doing distributed work. It's just barely beginning. I'm really
Yes.
interested in what happens over the next 25 years.
Well, we're doing distributed work on an interstellar basis. We probably will have figured it out.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That sort of thing. It's like our company is a distributed work company, but it was formed that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our C-level executives, who were scattered all over multinationally, mostly in the U.S., but also in Latin America. Um, it Because we came from the same industry with the same goal, there was a recognition factor. But still, when we have to argue something out, um, we're very good distributed, but I think we are better in person too. Which is why when we have big decisions, we come together physically.
It's great.
Little decisions, ongoing
Yeah, it's
things,
great.
we're just fine.
Yeah, it's
Everybody.
great.
The reason we're distributed though is because I wanted to find the best people with the highest capability, and I made a decision. I did not want to disrupt their families. I did not want to say, I choose you, but you have to choose to move your family and your kids and everything. You have to break your family up really from your grandparents and all that, move to California. I chose that. I felt I would not get the best talent if I put that constraint on it.
Yeah.
So getting everybody in the same room a lot of times means everybody has to live in the same geography or travel extensively.
Mm-hmm.
which is both of which are a huge economic and psychological, emotional burden on the individual, which transfers to the company oftentimes. That's a bigger challenge. If everybody lives in Manhattan, it's easy to get everybody to
Can I,
go to
can
the.
I ask you a question? Can I ask you a hypothetical? If tomorrow you had a um, the ability to do uh, speed of light travel
Mhm.
physically
I do
from
right now. Speed of
yeah,
light.
yeah, no, but no, I mean physically, like you walk through a door, person walks through into your
Sure.
office.
I've seen that movie. Yeah.
Okay, do you think that you would have your team, let's say you get perfect access to everyone in the world who is the best in their particular function, do you think that during the day, some portion of the day, do you think that you would choose to be in person working on what it means to build your business, or would this be the medium? If there was zero cost to travel, zero cost in time, would you be in person?
Well, if if I were a god, it could do that.
Yeah.
Um, that would be pretty interesting. But the reality is, the difficult truth, if you as you put it earlier, is that that's not a reality. That you can't do that.
Yeah, I know, but what my interest is in why, not so much that you can't. It's like, why would you choose to bring people together? What is
I
what
don't
is
know.
the
I don't know whether I would, except I know that I can't.
I see. Okay. We
Okay,
can go
so
back to AI maybe, but
yeah. It's an interesting question. And like I said, I don't know what the whether I would bother or not if I could. Certainly not all the
I
time.
would do this conversation in person. I would like 100% do this conversation in person.
Well, most people do want to hang out with me. That's true.
I want to know what's on your on the books, the rest of the books behind
Oh
you.
yeah.
Like I want to get the shape of like your
You
working
know,
life.
all you have to do is come visit. Plenty of room.
All right.
You know, the so that's not a problem. Okay, we're going down a rabbit hole here, and it's my fault. I apologize, but it's an interesting take to consider some of these things. What do you think the most common mistake leaders make with a return to office policy might be? Constraints. You've already talked about constraints, and
Yeah.
I've already brought up HR issues,
Yeah.
recruitment issues. What do you think else that we need to consider?
I think that they don't do top-down decision making. I think they distribute the decision making. And I think in some organizations that can work, but at least in the customers that we work with, and just to give you a sense, 61% of our customers now have employees in office at least 4 days per week. Um, we have a
Define your customer. My recognition is the majority of your customers are Fortune 1000 companies,
yep, that's right, Fortune 1000 companies.
and my company is not. Unfortunately, we're an Inc. 5000 company,
Yeah,
but that means I've got 100 odd people scattered around. Okay, I'm the more typical employer than yours. I'm the middle, small and medium sized enterprise employs more people globally or nationally than the largest corporations overall. So, is this return to office only good for larger groups, or is it equally good for smaller groups? And how do smaller groups adjust to return to an office structured in the same way?
well, I actually I don't I think painting with too broad a brush sort of is probably not. I don't know that my recommendation is the same for everybody, but my
If we're talking return to office in this context, we're talking return to office as it relates to Fortune 1000 company.
no, like if you really pressed me, I would be like any company that is small is going to benefit more meaningfully from being in person than a really large company. But that 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 aside, I think the thing that most organizations, regardless of the size of the organization, get wrong is the exec team doesn't take ownership over the policy. At least in this present moment,
Okay.
The executive teams that take ownership over the policy and then are very clear and transparent with their team as to why they are making that change credibly, um, those things tend to work out rather well. And I'll give you a practical example. Um, uh, Companies that we've seen companies sort of describe like why they're doing the return to
Sure.
office policy, and if you use one in particular, uses the language that about 80% of the policies that we implement as an organization of any kind are going to be in the best interests of both the company and the individuals that work here.
Says who?
I,
The
I,
company.
I what's that?
Says who? And I say only the company. The
Well,
employee
that's actually the point.
would all have to vote on that also.
Well, that's actually the point, is that I think the organization explicitly saying, hey, some 80%, and maybe it's 70, but let's call it 80% of the policies that we make are going to be in the best interest of both the individuals and the company. But there's going to be a percentage of policies, call it 20%, maybe it's as many as 30% or as much as 30%, that is that is where that diverges, where it is not in the best interest of the individual and the organization.
Mhm.
And in those cases, we want to just be really clear as a management team, we are always going to choose the company. And like that is an extraordinary statement. If you are willing to tell your teams, look, on the vast majority of the policies that we make, we are totally aligned. And when we diverge, we're going to make the best decision for the company. It all of a sudden allows for a transparent discussion about whether or not a person wants to opt in to
Yeah,
that.
no, exactly. No, I think that's what I said. What I was saying is, says who?
You get to vote with your feet. Yeah,
Company says that 80% of the decisions are in the best interest of both. If the That's what the executive team says. If you were to put it to a vote of all the employees, would they in fact 80% say yes, or would it be 40% of the total workforce says,
sure,
yeah, not really,
sure.
overall? So it it's very much like a government saying all decisions the government makes are in the best interest of its citizens.
Well, maybe, but I don't know that the percentages matter. I think saying that out loud is what matters. Saying that there is going to be a divergence is what really matters.
That's what matters.
It could be 40%. The
Agree.
truth could be
That's what
60%.
matters.
But companies don't like saying, they don't like conflict. They don't like the fact that they have to say the words out loud. And the reason they get neutered is because you go through legal, you go through comms, you go through PR, and all of a sudden like everything gets like distilled down into like a form that's anodyne, and then you get these articles in the news about these companies doing RTO and having really like terrible policies. And the reason they have a terrible policy is because it got watered down. They probably started off with something really declarative and direct, which is what, frankly, adults who work in companies would really appreciate. It gets
Yes.
distilled down into something that essentially makes people feel like they're being talked to like children because they are. And then all of a sudden, you've reduced the trust that the individuals have in the organization. So that would be like my primary flag on failure modes for when they deal.
I would agree. And then I'll distill that just down to honesty,
Yeah,
um, and honesty based on a known value, which is shareholder value in this case, which is the company in
sure.
many
Yeah,
large companies. So I would extend that statement. We're going to do what's in the best interest of the company and its shareholders, as opposed to just the amorphous company.
sure. Yes.
Because that's really what the company represents is its shareholders. No, I agree with you on that. That's important, and I think again I'll go back to the HR issue. I don't think companies are hiring on that with that clarity in mind. That creates its own set of confusion.
Yeah.
I think that can happen. But when we talk about space, we talk about return to office. Office is space. Um, Most people think of it as fixed. Um, why isn't it fixed? Why is fixed space broken as a concept?
Well, that's most, and I may be misinterpreting your question, but my I think it's like an excellent question about fixed space. If you talk to most organizations that are dealing with large teams, they are making real estate decisions monthly, quarterly. Uh, they
Daily. Yeah.
they are growing and shrinking at the same time. And if you talk to a brokerage like a JLL or CBRE or a Cushman, they often have a line item called fee to value ratio, where
Hmm.
they look at the they're like, here's the real estate, the square footage we consolidated in the last quarter. Here's our costs that you pay us. Here's the fee to value ratio, the conversion of like how much we saved you. So, but at the very same meeting, they will be discussing a new building that they're investing in. And so to assume that space is fixed is actually to assume that the company itself is stagnant. When in reality, all companies, for the most part, and it's
Yeah.
a generalization, are either growing or shrinking at any given time.
Well, and I think the addition, we're looking right now at a major city that wants to reanalyze its return to office policies. Um, it has had a lot of remote workers, and in doing that, they're reestablishing a percentage of their space as flex space. They're basically going to run
Mm-hmm.
three or four floors in the city hall as if it was a giant co-working center, and track very much like density does, like your company does, track utilization and manage utilization for its efficiency as well as for its the attendance factor, so to speak. Both of those things. So I think that is a model that we're going to see become the norm, as opposed to the exception that it was in the past, overall.
You know,
Um,
you're also putting your finger on something that doesn't get talked about very often, which is corporate headquarters have agreements with city governments and states that give them tax breaks for having their offices and headquarters in those cities.
yes.
What do you think? What do you think happens to those tax? Like, do you think the companies are returning the tax breaks when people decide not to go into the headquarters anymore? Like, there's a whole bunch of really interesting commercial relationship, like this, like underbelly of like return to office. There are like real financial motivators for city centers, and I don't know what is happening in many of those conversations, but I know they're happening.
Well, I agree with you. We see some of those happening, but I'll bring up another point: how sustainability and environmental impact. Return to office has a greater environmental impact by some standards than remote work. Okay, because you're causing people to go into a motion or a commute sense. And the further you have to move them, obviously, the more impact it has. So, to your point, when a, kind of, a company relocates its corporate headquarters from California to Texas, fairly common these days, pick any brand name. When that happens, think of the disruption that happens to the people in California making that decision, their families, etc. And then they have to relocate to Texas. The company got a good tax break, but the employees didn't, necessarily, or actually they would have in that case. Um, but there's a whole bunch of other dynamics that are employee related, not just company related to that. And commute being one of them. That we on the one hand, we say we want to address climate change. On the other hand, we say we want everybody to return to the office, and we don't care if they have to commute or not. That's their problem.
Yeah,
Whether it's public, which has less impact, or private, which has more impact, it still has impact. Um,
we could take this in so many different directions. I mean, I think that this has a lot to do on like the climate side. I think this has a lot to do, or the sustainability side has a lot to do with if you think that uh, if you believe in abundance, like if you believe abundance is possible, like energy abundance is possible, or if you believe that like energy stores are fixed and that we need to reduce growth. And so, like, if you assume that if you assume that energy is like energy abundance is achievable, so like
right.
30% of U.S. energy is nuclear. I didn't know that, but like a little while ago, but apparently some 30%, maybe it's a little bit less, of
Yeah,
all energy use in the United States is nuclear, which is
yeah.
amazing. It's just hard to build nuclear plants.
Well, what's weird is in Texas, 50% of it's renewable, and you think of Texas as an oil burning state.
Totally,
Uh,
totally. And if you look at the cost curve on kilowatt hour for solar, we are we are there is a solar decade coming. We are wandering into a really interesting territory where if we get storage right, some incredible companies in Texas actually, um, with like really innovative storage mechanisms.
Correct.
If we get solar and storage correct, you end up with like energy and independence and energy abundance. And if our fleet of cars electrifies, I guess my point is this concept of like should people be commuting gets can contribute to some discussions around sustainability, but that sort of presumes that the underlying uh, like carbon footprint of commuting remains static and doesn't
Well,
change.
but whether there's a carbon footprint or not, there's still a cost. And well, let's use your electric car model.
Sure.
A Tesla costs more than a Corolla. Okay. Um, so the cost of a lot of these sustainable technologies, in layman's term, is actually higher, and in some cases, not affordable.
But you can buy a Model Y.
Affordable, but the cost of the to
Yeah.
use the energy. Uh, so that's another approach. We could wander around this for days and everything. I'm going to ask you one last question, Andrew. Um, what's the most popular opinion you hold about the future of work? Unpopular, I should say.
Oh, the most unpopular.
Unpopular. What's your most cringe worthy concept?
Um,
You're embarrassed to say it now. I can tell. Uh,
I want to first say like I am a biased because we build systems that measure people in buildings, and B, uh, I don't run a 500,000 person organization. And so like the things that I might believe are obviously colored by my personal experience and biases. So attempting to set those,
Yeah, you're probably closer to every man in that regard, though, than being on the extreme.
we're definitely closer in terms of size. Like
Yeah.
our organizations our problems are very similar to as opposed to Fortune 1000. So, but trying to set aside my biases for a second, I think hybrid is a cop out. I think that we should decide. I think companies would do best to decide if they are a remote team that does offsites periodically, or if they are an in-person team that has uh, that periodically works from anywhere. And I think that like those two ends of the like distribution curve are the most likely to succeed. And I think in the middle is where mediocrity goes. And I think a lot of organizations have wandered towards mediocrity, largely born of fear of retention and fear of recruitment of top talent, instead of deciding what is the mission or what does the organization stand for. And in your case, based on a lot of your answers and perspectives, it sounds a lot like you deeply value the shareholders that are your employees, that like the company and its team are synonymous. And I
Yes.
think in many other organizations, the team is a meaningful portion of the company, but the company has these divergences in the thing that it's going to decide, and sometimes that's not in the best interest of the individuals. And both of those things are good, and both of those things should exist. Um, and the fact that you are clear with your team about the rules of the game that they're going to play at your company, like that, in my opinion, is the ingredient for success. Um, and I think an organization deciding to be 4 or 5 days a week in person and is very clear about it, unequivocal about it, is an ingredient for success. And neither of those are like wrong. What's wrong, or not wrong, but like most inefficient, is like not choosing and just sort of like, well,
Agreed.
it's hybrid, you
Agreed.
know.
We could argue. I think hybrid's great, by the way. Uh, I mean, because I believe in a
Clear hybrid, a policy.
I believe in that we're all in a state of flux. You were talking about that as related to space. I think that all jobs, industries, companies are in a state of flux, and that requires a variety of work models, not a single work model. If I were to go to a single work model for a company, I'd have to get rid of 100% of all outsourcing and all offshoring and nearshoring also. I would have, if I was going to be pure, 100% pure, I'd have to say, oh, I can't put that call center in the Philippines. I've got to put it in Philadelphia. Uh, you know, uh, I would have to do those things too. And we know that companies aren't willing to do that. So, we're stuck in a dilemma. So, we're in a interesting, same values, agree, same goals, don't agree on the best way to get there always. That position, I think,
Yeah,
today, but
yeah, I
between,
think that's right.
um, and but gosh, you have amazing data, and I've seen your data sets and looked at some of your reports and stuff. Amazing data from which to draw your opinions, and I'd love to be able to publish one of your reports if that's okay. Share it with our audience, because the value of that in making individual company decisions, I think, is very high.
Of course.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Andrew, thank you again. Next time we meet, my place or your place, you name it.
I'll come to you. That'd be great.
Okay, okay. Tequila's on me. I'm in Texas.
Great. Can't wait.
Adios, my friend.
See ya.
Bye bye.
If it's impacting the future of work, it's in the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space.